During my trip, I was confronted by an unpleasant couple who accused me of something I didn't do. Taking my hand, my husband tried to reassure me, saying it's okay because they apologized, and we began to walk away. But then, a man grabbed my husband's shoulder, stopping him in his tracks. Suddenly, my husband's demeanor changed dramatically, and in a powerful, low voice, he asked, "What about your job?" The man, not understanding what my husband meant, pushed him back defiantly. However, in the next instant, something unexpected happened. This is the story of Mrs. Williams, 37 years old, a housewife sharing her experience. My name is Venus Williams, currently 37 years old. My husband, Ted, is 2 years older at 39. We have been married for 10 years now. My husband bears a resemblance to a globally famous bear character. Not only in appearance, with his plump and round figure, but his face also somehow resembles that character. He has a gentle personality, and being with him brings a sense of comfort and tranquility. He is always calm, and I have never seen him angry. In fact, I don't have a close relationship with my parents. They always look down on me and treat me as if I were stupid. I never rebelled against them, simply accepting it all. But perhaps it's more accurate to say that I've grown accustomed to it and just let their words slide off me. Because of who I am, my parents treat my husband in the same way. However, no matter what rude things are said, my husband never gets angry and always remains calm. My husband and my brother are the same age, but they are completely different types, with my brother being more neat and smart-looking. Ever since we were children, my confident brother has been saying disrespectful things to me, but after getting married, he started saying hurtful things to my husband instead of me. From my brother's perspective, my husband, who doesn't talk back, seems to be an excellent outlet for relieving stress. I have asked my husband why he doesn't get angry, because you're my family. He says with a smile, although I find him a bit unreliable, having no memories of being treated kindly by my own family, I am always saved by my husband's kindness. We, as a couple, don't have any children. We tried infertility treatments, but we couldn't achieve any positive results. Because of that, my relationship with my parents worsened even further, and we decided to move to my husband's hometown in order to create distance. At the time, my parents strongly opposed the move. I had been sending few $100s to my parents' home every month because I had a higher monthly income, but it seems they thought the support would stop once we moved. My husband was also a government employee, so it might have been inconvenient for my parents to see him leave a stable job. Because my husband was a government employee, I was blamed quite a bit for changing the story after allowing the marriage. However, we were determined and decided to move. We were told that if we move, we should sever our ties, but that's exactly what I wanted. Currently, my husband and I live together with his parents, who are farmers. I've heard that sometimes a farmer's wife is treated like a servant, but that's not the case with us at all. My in-laws are very kind, and I am very satisfied with our cohabitation. Despite a decrease in income compared to before, I am happier and more fulfilled now. Then one day, my in-laws made a proposal. During the agricultural off-season, they suggested that the two of us go on a trip. I hesitated, but my husband became enthusiastic and started researching various things. In the end, taking advantage of my in-laws' kindness, we decided to go on the trip. It had been several years since our last trip, so both my husband and I were very excited. Since I usually spend time with my in-laws, there is hardly any time for my husband and I to relax together. It was a short period of 1 night and 2 days, but it was a very happy time. However, it happened on the second day. In a famous tourist spot, while walking together, we unexpectedly encountered a trouble. It was a famous place for gourmet food tasting, where we, as a couple, enjoyed trying various things to eat while walking around. My husband, who loves sweet treats, was indulging in nothing but baked goods and other sweet treats. At one shop, a little girl came up to him. "You look like a bear, don't you?" she said to him. The girl's mother hurriedly apologized, but my husband just smiled and waved at the girl. Both of us were full from eating, and we were thinking of heading back. As we walked along, suddenly a rough-looking Yankee-like couple approached us from the front, and for some reason, the man bumped into my shoulder. I'm not entirely certain, but it felt like he intentionally bumped into me as he approached. I apologize for not being able to comply immediately. However, the ill-mannered man was quite angry, and he yelled at me, "There's no way you can just apologize." And then, he blamed me for not knowing how to apologize like an adult. As I was getting upset, he demanded that I pay for his medical expenses. As if he was piling on, he mentioned getting injured. I didn't collide in a way that would cause such an injury, so I thought he must be mistaken or acting strange, and it made me feel sick. Clearly, it's a groundless accusation. Although he touches his shoulder, he doesn't appear to be injured. The other person is taller than my husband, a large man who seems to be well over 6 foot tall. Even though I wanted to seek help from someone, I couldn't find any. Security guards around, and even the passers-by, kept their distance from us, or simply ignored us as they walked by. "Don't you hear? Old lady. Pay for his medical expenses." A woman who seemed to be the lover of the person joined in, and the two of them started demanding money from us. I still don't think I'm of an age to be called old lady, so I couldn't help but react momentarily to the word old lady. This has become quite troublesome. I am disappointed that our trip, which was supposed to be enjoyable, has taken such a turn of events. Nevertheless, I had become rigid with fear, unable to utter a word. "Even your husband, why don't you say something instead of keeping quiet?" "Well, for starters, can the old man at least apologize?" Demanding that the husband take responsibility for his wife's actions. Since I was frozen, the focus shifted from me to my husband. He is usually calm, but maybe I hoped he would say something strong, and just as I expected, he genuinely apologized, bowing his head. I felt a little disappointed. What a pitiful old man. And then, they mentioned a specific amount of money. "You're rich, right? $1,000 will do." Seeing that my husband appeared weak, the other person seemed to adopt an even more aggressive stance. However, looking at my husband's apologetic attitude, perhaps he thought I would follow suit and provide the money. The ill-mannered woman, unable to work due to injury, is instigating the man, suggesting that he lower the amount to $2,000. While the man boasts, saying, "I have a high hourly wage," the two of them laugh vulgarly. It's not good to judge people by appearances, but judging by the clothes the man is wearing, he doesn't seem like a high earner. In the first place, he shouldn't have any injuries or such. However, I can't think of anything other than providing money to get out of this situation. We are on a trip, so we have more money than usual. Even if I don't say 1,000, I might be able to negotiate with the money I have on hand. As the situation becomes more troublesome, and considering the possibility that they might resort to violence against us, I began to think that some expenses are inevitable. Hurry up and pay, my boyfriend is quite strong. Well, he used to be pretty bad in the past. The man said that if you pay the money, he won't resort to violence. Pay the money or endure violence. Those are the only two options. A situation with no other solution. Feeling cornered, that's how I felt. I looked at my husband, who was frozen just like me. Realizing that there was no choice but to pay, I reached for my wallet, in my bag. Then, my husband grabbed my arm and said, "Are you okay, Venus?" "Then it's fine. I'm scared, these people. It's dangerous, let's run away." I was surprised. I never expected to hear those words from my husband, suggesting we escape. I've always been bad at running since I was a child, always teased by my older brother. So, I thought there was no way I could escape from these two young individuals. As I was in a panic, I apologized, "So it's okay, now," my husband said softly, grabbing my arm and attempting to walk away. He tried to grab my arm and walk away, but the unsavory man seemed to not hear my husband's voice. In fact, it wasn't a soft voice to that extent. As he tried to walk away, the man grabbed my husband's shoulder to stop him. "Hey, old man. Don't you dare run." Upon hearing that voice, my husband's demeanor suddenly changed. "What about your job?" Though my husband's voice was low, it carried considerable intensity. Looking at the man he had asked, he seemed unable to understand what was going on. Of course, I didn't understand either. "What does my job have anything to do with it?" the man said as he pushed my husband's shoulder. However, in the next moment, something unexpected happened. The unsavory man stumbled forward and fell down. For a brief moment, he wore a bewildered expression, but then he started shouting angrily at my husband. "Ouch! What are you doing?" "I just dodged. I didn't do anything." "You're the one who tripped on your own, right?" In reality, even to me, it seemed like my husband had just dodged. However, the way the man fell was quite dramatic. It could be called a graceful fall, as if he enjoyed collapsing. I was taken aback by the sudden incident, while the man's face turned red with anger. Looking at my husband, strangely, he remained calm and composed. The man's voice grew more and more emotional, demanding compensation, as he shouted loudly. Unlike when he collided with me, this time it could be said that it was my husband's fault. Anxiety filled me as I watched the interaction between the two. "You don't even know who I am." "Huh? Who are you?" "I don't know you at all." "You're Baboka, right?" The rough-looking man had a puzzled expression, wondering how my husband knew his name. Perhaps that name was correct. At that moment, it suddenly occurred to me. My husband's previous profession was a teacher at a public high school. Until just before returning to our hometown, he had been working at a vocational school, known for its mischievous students. This man seemed to be one of my husband's former students. "On my end, I don't have time to play around. I'll ask you again. What happened to the job I recommended?" "The old man's recommendation." "Wait, are you a teacher?" Finally, the man seemed to understand. "About my husband." Compared to when he worked at the high school before, my husband had gained weight, and his facial features had changed. So it was understandable that the man didn't notice right away. Now as the man, formerly known as Bob, couldn't hide his surprise, he stared at my husband intently. By the way, you mentioned getting injured. Where did you get hurt? My husband reached out his hand to Bob. In response, Bob quickly stood up, assured him that he was fine, and distanced himself from my husband. Perhaps thinking he would be harmed, he had a fearful expression on his face. There's no way you're okay. You said it was bad enough that you couldn't work. Was that a lie? No, it wasn't a lie. I was really in pain earlier. As Bob desperately spoke, my husband spoke coldly. You have an injury that causes you pain, but why is your wife unharmed? Isn't that strange? I'm sorry, I exaggerated a bit. Confronted by my husband, realizing that he couldn't lie anymore, Bob finally confessed. Why didn't you tell me sooner? She asked. You knew who I was, didn't you? He replied. Don't act spoiled. I've already quit being a teacher, and you're already graduated, working in the real world, right? She pleaded with him, saying, Don't say such cold things, as my husband pushed him away. It was the first time he witnessed my husband being so sternly distant. During his time as a teacher, he had been kind and considerate towards his students, so seeing this new side of my husband made me feel a certain way. Do you always engage in such things here? Extortion is a serious crime, you know. No, I've never done it. From what she observed, his interactions with women seemed well coordinated, as if he were accustomed to it. My husband also seemed to have doubts. And by the way, didn't you just refer to my wife as the old lady earlier? That wasn't me. She said it. He pointed to his girlfriend. Upon hearing this, I couldn't help but feel disappointed. I retracted my sympathy for Bob, who couldn't defend the woman. Upon hearing this, the woman began to get angry. However, my husband paid no attention to Bob's girlfriend and continued lecturing Bob. What about your job? Are you taking the day off today? I'm sorry. I quit that job. Bob felt a sense of guilt for quitting the job he was introduced to by my husband, and his expression grew dark and downcast. Upon hearing this, my husband let out a sigh and continued speaking. If you feel that the job isn't suitable, quitting is inevitable. But, stop causing trouble for others. And, by the way, you used to lie, saying you were a bad person. The one who was bad is a completely different person, with the same name as you, aren't they? Bob, exposed by his husband's revelation, wore an embarrassed look. And when he realized that his husband was a teacher, his attitude completely changed. The momentum he had just a moment ago vanished without a trace, and the people around, witnessing the contrast in his demeanor, couldn't help but chuckle. Bob's girlfriend, sensing the atmosphere around her, muttered how embarrassing it was, and tried to move away from the scene. However, the woman who started walking was immediately called out by my husband. Momentarily bewildered, the woman stopped in her tracks. It seems like my husband is scared. He has a frightened expression. Apologize to my wife. You said something disrespectful about my wife. I haven't forgiven you. Overwhelmed by my husband's force, the woman lowered her head and ran away, saying, I'm sorry. Left alone, Bob had a sad expression on his face. And then, as if struck by a thought, he apologized to me and my husband, and tried to leave, just like the woman. Immediately, my husband grabbed Bob's arm and stopped him. Compared to my chubby husband, the other person was a young man, with a height of over 6 foot, and a good physique. The sight of my husband capturing Bob was somewhat bizarre, and the people around seemed surprised too. "Take responsibility for what you did to my wife. You ruined our long-awaited trip, so please forgive me. She's already gone, isn't she? You brought this upon yourself." Seeing Bob slump his shoulders, the people around nodded in agreement. I also agree with my husband's criticism. To protect her, I pretended to be the aunt, but if I had said it was me, I might have raised my stature as a man, but unfortunately, it ended with a disappointing outcome. After that, for about 10 minutes, a public sermon was held, right in the heart of the tourist spot. Bob hung his head and listened quietly. There was quite a crowd, and there were people glancing at us as they walked by, which made me feel slightly embarrassed. However, I was happy to see a dependable side of my husband for the first time, and I wanted to keep watching him, so I continued to observe him. Later, it seemed like someone had reported it, and a police officer rushed over. I was afraid that my husband would hand over Bob to the police, but he explained to the officer that there was no problem at all. Bob also nodded along with my husband. The police officer had an expression of disbelief, but upon hearing my husband say it was fine, he reluctantly left. With the departure of the police officer, the people around us gradually began to leave. Afterward, Bob promised my husband that he would never cause such a problem again. And then, he apologized to me once again. I experienced fear and embarrassment, but since there were no injuries and no money was taken, I decided to forgive him. According to what I later heard from him, my husband is skilled in boxing and has even participated in national competitions, so he was quite strong. During my time as a teacher, I served as the advisor of the boxing club, and it seems that my husband's strength was famous among the students. I had heard that he was the advisor of the boxing club, but I didn't think he was that strong. The reason he didn't teach me the details was because he didn't want to intimidate me, or so I've been told. When we first met, I thought my husband was a scary person. There is a height difference of 1 feet between me and my husband. It was difficult for me to overcome the fear of being around someone so much bigger than myself. My husband sensed my feelings and treated me with great care. "I'm sorry for scaring you. Did you start to dislike me?" My husband asked me with a worried expression, but I shook my head vigorously. It has been about 15 years since I met my husband. I have always thought of him as a very kind and honest person, someone I could trust. That hasn't changed. If anything, seeing his reliable side made me fall in love with him even more. By the way, about Bob, he said, "The teacher may be strict, but he's a really good teacher," and left with a mysterious follow-up. And so, about a year passed. Surprisingly, we were able to conceive a baby. It was a late pregnancy at the age of 38, but now things are stable, and we are relieved. Both my husband and my parents-in-law are overjoyed. They all become overly protective of me. Lately, they don't let me do any farm work at all. I was worried about the shortage of manpower, but to my surprise, Bob came as an agricultural trainee. Maybe because I respect my husband, he is doing it seriously, and has a good reputation in the family. That's how we were leading a peaceful and enjoyable life, but one day, something unbelievable happened. My parents and brother suddenly appeared and demanded to hand over the child. It turns out that my brother got divorced, and the children went to their ex-wife. My brother was left alone, without an heir. So they resorted to the cruel act of taking away my child. Perhaps they thought that, as weak-willed as my husband and I are, we would comply with anything. However, my husband was furious, and he yelled at my parents, with an intense expression. My parents, after a bewildered expression, suddenly seemed frightened, and hurriedly fled. Having been treated unfairly by my family for so long, seeing that scene made me feel extremely relieved. After that, I safely gave birth to a lovely baby girl, and I am leading a peaceful and happy life every day.